Listen up, fellow babies, it's time for another episode of Hold My Order, Terrible Dresser, the deep dive, history nerd, WKRP in Cincinnati podcast. I'm Mike Grasso. With me, as always, Rob McDougall. How you doing, Rob?
I'm doing just great, Mike.
Excellent. Well, we are going to hit a couple of Season 4 episodes today. We're going to talk about Straight from the Heart and Who's on First. And we're going to start with Straight from the Heart. Kind of very special episode-y, to a certain extent.
A little bit?
Yeah, where Herb is being a little shifty around the office about his vacation, but through some sleuthing, it turns out, Jennifer finds out he's actually going into the hospital for some tests on his heart. And after Jennifer finds this out, it sends Les over to check on his friend Herb to find out how he is.
You say sleuthing. I would say snooping. Actually, one of the things that struck me about that scene is that Herb is acting all mysterious.
Yeah.
He goes to the filing cabinet, leaves, and Bailey immediately looks in the filing cabinet and says, Herb took his health insurance forms with him on his vacation. And then Jennifer and Les immediately go into Herb's desk, start flipping through things. Yeah. And it's not just Les, the sort of snoop, who does it. Jennifer pulls out a piece of paper and starts reading his will. Herb has written his will because he's nervous about the tests.
Yeah, I mean, on one level, you could say this is the traditional sort of sitcom family structure. People really care about each other at the station. Yeah. On the other, you could say this is the sort of era before, stringent HIPAA rules, and this is a clear violation of Herb's privacy. So, yeah, you can look at it either way, really. But, everybody all of a sudden becomes very, very worried about what Herb's up to. And Herb, of course, is Herb. So he's got a lot of anxiety about what's going on. He doesn't really want to face up to the fact that he's getting older and that he might have some health problems. And so he concocts a escape plan with Les. Herb says he wants to, live life to its fullest. And he and Les end up going to a 3D porn theater.
Are you coming?
Where?
To be among the living, Les.
But I was going to Omaha.
Les, lying here tonight, I realize just how precious every second of life is. And starting right now, this is one guy who's going to experience the wonder and beauty of life from a front row seat. Let's go.
Greta.
Dieter.
Ich würde so gerne was über die europäische Wirtschaft.
That's a marvelous cut right there. It's not subtle, but at the same time, they don't belabor it too much.
Yeah.
Herb gives this speech about how he's going to live like he was dying. He's going to live life to the fullest. He's going to grab life by the polyester lapels and shake it for everything it's worth. And as he's saying that, this cheesy music comes up over the music from the next scene bleeds into this scene. And we cut to, where do they go? To a porn theater, to a 3D adult theater.
And, of course, in order for the comedy to reach a fever pitch, literally everybody from the station also has to come to the 3D porn theater because Les called them to try and convince Herb to stay in the hospital and stick with the tests.
And this is, probably the most memorable scene in the episode. The one that everybody, I think, remembers is everybody in the cast stumbling into this theater wearing the 3D glasses, the old school red, blue 3D glasses. Of course, we never see the screen of the theater, but we hear voices speaking in German.
The dulcet Teutonic tones of 1970s German porn on the screen. Yeah.
And periodically, everyone in the theater ducks or leans to the left to avoid whatever is coming at them from the screen.
It's a great bit of synchronized physical comedy from everybody in the audience.
It's a little bit like on the old Star Trek, where they would they'd
all have to shift to one side,
simulate
right?
The ship.
Oh God!
No, just a friend. Thank you anyway. Les, you were right. He is in the hospital.
Who?
Now, it could be any number of little things. You know what a frightened man Herb is.
Well, I sure do. He's my best friend.
Look, Les, when you get home tomorrow, we'll go visit him, okay?
Why didn't he tell me, Jennifer?
Well, I'm sure he didn't want to worry anyone. You know how thoughtful Herb is. I'm sure it's nothing. Don't get carried away.
Jennifer, This is one time I wish I weren't fully cocked.
Generally speaking, this is a Herb and Les episode, I would say. This is kind of the culmination of their whole sort of like weird, quasi-abusive, quasi-codependent friendship. The scene that we get right before the commercial break, right before they go to the porn theater, is actually pretty well acted, I thought. And I think Frank Bonner really acquits himself really well in this episode. He's asked to do some silly things, and he's asked to make some silly decisions, but...
But he's genuinely... Right, the episode only, depends on him being genuinely scared.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. This comes up in the next of our two episodes this week.
So much continuity in this season.
There's continuity. These really are a pair. This is a paired set. That his anxiety, at least in part, takes the form of anxiety about his career. He's like one of the reasons he's keeping things secret is he insists that if they find out you've got a bad ticker, your days as a productive employee are numbered. Your days as a salesman are numbered. They'll replace you. But of course, he's obviously, frightened about his mortality.
How do you know I was here?
It's my job to know things, Herb.
You didn't tell anybody. I mean, you didn't tell Carlson or Andy.
Not Carlson or Andy.
Good. Oh, buddy, Les. I thought you were supposed to be in Omaha.
Well, that flight you booked me on doesn't leave till 3 a.m.
Oh, yeah. That's a nice flight, Les.
Herb, why didn't you tell me?
It's no big deal. You know how doctors are. You know how people go off half-cocked? Do I look healthy? Better than you. I tell you what. Go ahead and hit me in the stomach.
Oh, Herb.
No. I mean it. Just go.
Well, you said to do it, Herb.
Yeah, they do have this good scene. I think this whole episode, is, if there's a theme, beyond the silliness, it seemed to me like a theme of this episode was kind of the male ego and male fragility. There's Herb's anxiety, which is tying his health to his job. He's delighted to see Les, but he's also got to be sort of macho with Les, and he's like, I'm in better shape than you. Go ahead, hit me in the stomach. And they do that bit,
Such a classic dad thing to do in the 70s and 80s, right? Yeah. You think you're so tough, kid, huh? Yeah, give me a sock in the jaw, in the stomach, or whatever. Oh God!
Like the feats of strength on Festivus. Yeah, do you know anyone that really did that? Like, my apologies if your dad actually ever did that. But
it feels like an older uncle thing to do. You know what I mean? Like they'll get themselves all like steeled up, like the guy who takes the cannonball in that stock footage. You know what I mean? And then they'll have like the 5-year-old kid just come and punch him in the stomach.
Wait, isn't that how Houdini died?
Yeah,
I believe it is how the great Harry Houdini died, was from taking one of those punches.
Oh God.
Oh, here comes that cannonball guy. He's cool.
Are you being sarcastic, dude?
I don't even know anymore.
All right.
That was odd.
Gee, I don't like the sound of that.
No biggie. I'm cool.
Homer, nothing's more important to me than the health and well-being of my freaks. I'm sending you to a vet.
Yeah, so you're right. Like the male fragility doesn't stop there. I mean, I guess Les's subplot about receiving the newest award to join his imitation wood grain trophy case, the Copper Cob, being awarded in Omaha, Nebraska. Maybe that's not male fragility, but there's your male ego. Sort of the standard.
That's right, and he never gets to Omaha. It's like a dream to me now.
Yeah, I feel
he never makes it to Omaha. That's one of the. I feel like this is just a hang up of mine that like TV shows plots that hinge on somebody wants to go somewhere, and you kind of realize halfway through the episode that they're never going to get there.
It happens a lot.
Those really cause anxiety in me. Like I can't relax because I'm just like, you're not going to make it to Omaha. And I just like...
This sounds like the kind of thing I would be worrying about when I'm 8 or 9 years old watching WKRP. Oh, Les didn't get to go to Omaha to get his award. Oh, no.
I can't believe it. You guys are afraid of me.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Look at you. You are terrified to play a few hands of nickel-dime poker with a female.
Not really terrified.
Oh, I thought you were real men, but you're just whipped.
It's not me. Venus is the one who's afraid.
I am not.
You are so.
Oh, no, I'm not.
Yes, you are, man.
9 o'clock, I'll bring the cards.
The other day, you said, I don't want
Oh, and then Johnny and Venus have a regular poker game, and Bailey wants to come in and play poker with the boys.
That's right, because Les can't make it to the game.
Yeah.
And they don't seem too upset about that, although you could certainly imagine Les might be a kind of popular kind of a mark to have at a poker game where you're playing for real money. But they don't want Bailey to play. And again, male ego, male fragility. She's like, what, are you guys scared? In fact, she doesn't just say, are you guys scared? She calls them whipped.
Yeah.
Which I mean, I don't know. Is it weird to you to hear Bailey taunt the guys as whipped? Like
it's interesting. What's really funny is like the first time I was aware of that saying actually came from another TV show. There was a sketch on SNL in the late 80s, early 90s. P-Whipped. Was the name of the sketch.
Yeah.
And they could go a little more daring at,
by the 90s,
Saturday.
they could add the P.
Yeah, exactly.
they couldn't quite come out and say, well, this is the thing. It's a little bit like, was it Les Moonves or with the CBS executive worrying about bad Mamma Jamma?
Oh, yeah, no, Grant Tinker, right, yeah.
It was Grant Tinker, of course, right. But, like, is whipped ever, it only is used as a short form of pussy whipped, right?
Yeah,
I mean, the etymology of this is the sort of thing that doing this podcast makes you suddenly wonder, like, is anyone ever whipped by anything else?
And it's a weird kind of way to put it. I guess maybe the meaning of the term was a little more embryonic at this point, and sort of like, but like, I mean, I Bailey's really good in this episode, and I really appreciate the fact that they respect the sort of arc of the episode by, making sure to let us know that as they are sort of in the porn theater, it's clear that Bailey did do well and did win and did eventually get to go to the poker game and beat the guys, which is great.
Right. And that's the resolution at the end, is that then after the theater gets busted, because of course, that's Chekhov's gun. You said there's the news story about the Vice Squad raids at the beginning. Of course, they get busted at the theater, and they're all hauled in. I'm not sure exactly on what charge, but they're all hauled in. And then Bailey ends up...
Yeah, she ends up referencing it when they're in the cell because she's got the deck of cards with her. So
she's got the cards, so she gets Herb to... they're trying to convince Herb to go take the tests.
Yeah.
And she ends up getting him to cut the cards. Now, cutting cards is not actually an activity in which one can leverage a whole lot of skill.
Right.
But the implication is that somehow she's a really good gambler, and
she can keep her string of luck going. Right.
Her string of, and once again, she browbeats Herb into doing it. By, uses
impugning his masculinity. Yeah, exactly.
To get him to play along. Although then, there's that nice little business where, even though Bailey only draws a 4, Herb then doesn't reveal what his card was. He says that he is lost, and so it's pretty clear. It's a face-saving way of him going to take the tests after all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what I mean by, like, the fact that Frank Bonner does everything really, really well in this episode. Like, again, you're right, it's really obvious that he's just conceding to all of these people who want him to be well and care about his health, but, like, you're right, he does it kind of in that sort of, like, very trying to be slick, but also kind of, like, secretly abashed kind of way that, like, okay, I'm going to do what you guys want me to do. And you're right, saves face by doing it.
And on the local scene this Friday afternoon, County Vice Squad raids continue with the closing of 2 more so-called adult theaters. Captain Ernest T. Gibbs, head of the Porn Patrol, had this to say about the progress of the raids.
Hoo-wee, that's good bacon. Sweet and smoky with a whole hog taste.
Porker's Paradise, snub-nose slap.
Moving from porn to corn, the Free Farmers Foundation of Omaha, Nebraska, finally made public today the name of this year's winner of their highest award in conservative agrarian broadcasting, the Copper Cob Trophy. I was quite surprised when Mr. Jimmy Lee Watson, president of these plowing patriots, called and told me...
All purveyors of obscenity will be exposed for what they really are. See to that.
Well, we always talk about the things in the episodes that are artifacts of their time. And there's certainly nothing that marks this episode of its time or as not being of our time more clearly than the porn theater, the adult theater, the 3D movie at the adult theater. And we have talked about porn before on the podcast. We talked about sort of Filthy Pictures, of course, led to a great discussion of the history of Playboy and girly magazines.
Print porn,
print pornography, but not so much about the adult theater side of things. And we actually get both the theater itself and the raid. There's the newscast about the Vice raids. That's historically appropriate for this time too, because I think that the adult theater, I just gotta I just find it, the whole concept of going to a theater to watch porn totally squicky. It is.
No, I mean, it absolutely is. I mean, but again, in the 70s, before we get to 1981 and we get to things like you're saying, raids to try and crack down on these places. Remember, there was that very short period where people thought this could be a thing that heterosexual couples did. You know what I mean? Go to a hip porn theater and see something like Deep Throat or, the opening of Misty Beethoven or Alice in Wonderland or any of those other sort of artsy, pseudo-artsy, early 70s porn films. So, but by this point, that chance, that era is gone forever. And of course, porn theaters were always sleazy. There's no, any attempt to make them sort of less sleazy went by the wayside. It's sort of it's a very tough, it's a very tough circle to square. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. To try and think of a way to make a nice, family
exactly.
porn theater or adult theater. Yeah, it's not. You can't get around it.
But I mean, the concept there is that it's like the whole Travis Bickle taking Sybil Shepherd to the theater in Taxi Driver. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not necessarily the place you want to take a first date.
No, not at all. No, and my sense is that the classic adult theater is kind of this place that just shows movies all day long, just keeps repeating them, and that there are or were addicts that would just sit there for hours on end.
There is literally no other widely available place for you to see motion picture porn at this point in history. Now, in 1981, the home video market was starting to open up a little bit. And even in the 70s, I mean, it's funny because I just watched this the other day. You've seen Autofocus, the Greg Kinnear, Willem Dafoe movie about Bob Crane and his...
No, I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen it? Oh, wow. It's Paul Schrader, so it's another Taxi Driver sort of But, I mean, there were certain people who had access to both home taping and sort of home VCRs before they were huge. And of course, that was one of the biggest things that was on demand is transferring all of these old stag movies and the sort of newer wave of 1970s porn to videotape. Because most people don't want to be exhibitionistic about things. I mean, oh my God, I'm just reminded now, you talked about the Pee Wee Herman arrest on Netflix.
Netflix, right.
Anyone that saw the movie where he was on his red bicycle, with the flat top, that was not the image projected on this particular evening. It's my understanding he now has a goatee, a mustache, and his hair is much longer. He had a cap on, and I guess he was dressed as any normal person going to a theater for an afternoon of theater enjoyment.
Police also say 3 other men were also arrested on a similar charge of indecent exposure, a misdemeanor crime that could mean up to 60 days in jail and a $500 fine for the comedian. Rubens, who grew up in Sarasota, refused to comment on the charges, but his attorney Dan Danheiser told the Sarasota Herald Tribune Sunday, quote, "He does a lot of things with kids over the world, and his career will be over when that story runs."
And there, I even talked about this sort of that it always seemed like entrapment to me that, as I understand it, porn theaters are legal, but masturbating in public is not legal.
Exactly.
And so you can be arrested
is public.
for...
It's an actual... It's not like you're, getting invited to a private residence or something like that.
No, and so when people get busted at porn theaters, it's generally for, a lewd act or something like that is the phrasing, and that's what they've been busted for.
Yeah. I mean, and we can't sort of forget about the fact that I think for a lot of people that's the thrill, right? Like it's these. You're right. There's sort of like a
right. The people that I find it extremely gross to even think of this, but that there are people for whom that's the point.
That is the point. Exactly.
That to go to the theater and that's the point.
Yeah.
And I guess there are, a very small number
I think that explains
actual adult theaters existing today.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And they
and I don't know if they're sort of like kitschy burlesque kind of deals, or if they are like
it's more sort of like a
hardcore
swinger
addicts.
Kind of, or sort of like the people like you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing with Paul Rubens. I think that in 1991 or whenever he got arrested, VCRs were widely available. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have a choice
Paul
at that
could,
point. And I think that the choice he made was for that reason, for sure. But as you said on Netflix, he's always been really private about his sexuality. So. The only things that we have to go on are sort of like these kind of things where he was, again, in early 90s, that's the kind of thing that is going to end your career, basically, especially when you have a kids show. But of course, he was never really truly a kid's entertainer. He was sort of like a,
Well, this is what I was saying on Netflix.
Yeah.
Is that I think that his arrest, totaled his career because he struck people as strange, and they couldn't quite figure out what was going on with the show, and there was this layer of camp sexuality under the surface. And so when the arrest came, the guardians of public morality were sort of like, aha, we knew it all along.
Yeah.
Now we understand. And then the other thing is that he wouldn't play the mea culpa cry and apologize on Oprah or Leno game, which is the standard prescribed way for a celebrity to get out of the penalty box.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And I think that part of that probably has to do with the privacy, but also part of it has to do with he's probably thinking to himself, I didn't do anything wrong. Consenting adults were in that theater, and I think that's probably a good explanation for how that all turned out. But again, this is a time period where that opportunity for porn theaters to become chic and cool has passed at this point. This is the point in Boogie Nights where everything's going to videotape and everything's gone horribly wrong for everyone,
Right. And the movies, the only way they can compete is to get more and more hardcore and disgusting.
Exactly.
And,
gimmicks like 3D, obviously,
and
probably
gimmicks
help
like
that.
3D.
So I have to wonder, do you think the movie that was showing on the screen, do you think that was made in 3D, or was it adapted to 3D? And they got a whole bunch of really weird West German sort of porn and just decided, well, listen, let's go ahead and put the red and blue overlays on this and we'll just make it into a 3D. I think with the sort of like you were saying, the people dodging sort of the things coming out at the screen probably means it was shot in 3D. And
that implies that the 3D is pretty good.
Yes.
And it also implies that they have some real action shots. It's a little bit like SCTV, Dr. Tongue's 3D House of Pancakes, or all but what on earth could be coming at you? We have,
Jeez, there's so many options.
Mercifully, no idea.
This is the best 3D I've ever seen.
I've seen better.
But 3D has gone through sort of its own kind of, successive waves of popularity. It's sort of the 3D
This
fad.
is much more comfortable ground for us to be treading on, is talking about 3D movies.
The 3D fad has come and gone, multiple times over the years.
Yeah.
And I think 81, 82. Yeah, there is an early 80s 3D fad.
I think there is,
I think it's back sort of in those days.
So there was Jaws 3D. That was the early 80s. I seem to remember they had a couple of TV events where they would give out the 3D glasses in the local newspaper or something like that.
Yep.
And or the TV Guide, or maybe that was it. But I wish I could remember, because I remember I told you about the Thriller party that we had when the Thriller video debuted.
Yeah,
you were kind of mystified by that. I remember our same family friends coming over for one of these 3D movie events that were on TV. I don't think it was like a network thing. I think it was like some kind of like, UHF station had some kind of 3D night or something like that. But like, it was always really disappointing on the TV, especially in the days before giant TVs. You know what I mean? You were kind of
no, it never really worked for me. In fact, I don't think I ever saw a 3D movie in the theater, and it never worked for me on TV. Like prior to the 21st century return of 3D.
Are you like the guy in Mallrats who can't see the sailboat? Is that what you're saying? Like,
I can see the sailboat. No, but 3D, it mostly just gives me a headache. That's right. I do not like 3D. Even the new high-tech 3D, I don't like it.
I don't, I don't go to the theater very much, and I certainly don't go to the theater for gimmick type, the latest Marvel movie in 4D IMAX with smell-o-vision.
For $5 your seat will vibrate occasionally. Yep.
I mean, it's like
Speaking of porn theaters.
I was gonna. They took all of the William Castle things and they basically mainstreamed them into like things that you have to have now when you go to the theater, But like,
those were all considered unspeakably cheesy back in the 60s and 70s.
I know, right?
Now.
I do remember when IMAX first came into being, though. It was at the Museum of Science here in Boston. Was one of the first two. You are literally zooming down like Sturo Drive, and you are on these like staggered like seats, and you're pitching forward as the car kind of accelerates and decelerates at high speed. I mean, that blew my mind more than any like 3D ever had. But of course, now these days, IMAX is kind of, pedestrian and par for the course. But
it is kind of, one of the first IMAX movies I saw was, the Rolling Stones, Steel Wheels. The Rolling Stones were always,
spare no expense.
Exactly, ready to make a buck off the, we talked about them in last week. And, so this is Steel Wheels era Rolling Stones, so early 90s, and at IMAX scale, like the crevices on Keith's face, you could shoot down those like you were you're flying, you're going to destroy the Death Star or something. Every movie theater didn't have an IMAX. Like you had to go to I think I saw it at like the Toronto CNE or something like that.
But like these gimmicks, like I mentioned William Castle a while ago. Like these are the kind of things that you do when a medium is starting to show its age a little bit. Look at all the stuff they've put out in TVs lately, like 4K, and they have the curved screens. Like the recent vogue for 3D on TVs didn't really go over that well. You know what I mean? But like this is what you do when your medium is ailing a little bit and needs a shot in the arm.
True.
And this is probably exactly when these porn theaters were starting to feel a little long in the tooth, and they were under assault in the early 80s. I remember in Boston, we had the Combat Zone down near Chinatown. That's gone now. But that was the Tenderloin, Den of Vice kind of area of Boston. And it was around this time that urban renewal and a lot of other stuff was causing these areas to get shut down. In fact, the original sort of like red light district, burlesque district, of course, of Boston was Scully Square on the West End, and that got demolished in the 50s for the Central Artery and a lot of other, urban development.
Okay, yeah. So, of course I'd heard of the Combat Zone. And even Cincinnati had its own Vice District.
I saw this is great.
This is going back a few more years, not Combat Zone era, but apparently Cincinnati had its own Vice District back before the First World War, going back to the late 19th century. That they would sort of heavily police and harass prostitutes and houses of ill repute outside of this little area, but let them go when they were inside this little area.
New Orleans had one of those as well. Like,
maybe the most famous one, sort of Storyville and Red Light District in New Orleans. And looking that up, I saw this funny article in Cincinnati Magazine about Cincinnati prostitutes on bicycles in the 1890s. Let me find that. During the bicycle craze of the 1890s, because there was a bicycle craze in the 1890s, and bicycle clubs sprung up everywhere. Everybody started cycling.
9 of the top 10 songs were about bicycling. May I take you on my velocipede, my dear?
Yes,
that was the number one for like 12 weeks back.
Yep. The police chief, the Cincinnati police chief, Philip Deitch, I'm reading here, passed a general order forbidding persons of loose character to parade around the streets on bicycles.
Yeah.
And this is what he was concerned by, was that prostitutes were flaunting their wares or traveling around the city outside of the red light district, rolling around on bicycles.
And it makes total sense. I mean, all kidding aside, like, this is one of the things we can't allow women to get on bicycles because they'll have the power of movement. And it's the whole Kate Beaton, sort of strip about that.
It's so much a Kate Beaton cartoon. And then the story even goes on to talk about a couple of chases, like where the police chased prostitutes, and like that seems like a sort of Keystone Cops,
Yeah, I'm picturing a kind of undercranked footage of she ducks into an alleyway and like the 5 cops on bicycles just ride on by. Yeah, I mean that's the thing though. It's like, you're right. They wanted to contain all of these vice districts because there was a conscious effort among these city fathers, right? They would literally like out loud say, we know that men need this like valve for their sort of, society destroying desires. We're going to have to give it to them, and we're going to have to keep it contained. And I know that like there's not really been a real life example of like the Wire plot about the district where they were going to decriminalize drugs, but like It's the same impulse. It's this idea that if you keep it contained, you won't have any of the associated vice that comes with it, the violence, the gambling, everything else leaking out of that area. But of course, it also ends up makes these areas into like a ghetto, basically. So
sure. So the Cincinnati red light district got shut down during the First World War as part of a sort of war era reform. That with a lot of soldiers in the city, they wanted to clean up the place. And that reminds me, I don't know if this story is true or apocryphal, but I know I've heard the story of the American doughboys arriving in France in World War I, and the French High Command happy to have the Americans there, saying, and the red light district is over here, and this is where the brothels are, and some American general saying, oh my word, don't tell President Wilson, he'll stop the war. The famously puritanical Woodrow Wilson would not have gone for official red light districts following the U.S. Army around.
May 10th. Thank God for the rain, which has helped wash away the garbage and the trash off the sidewalks. I'm working long hours now, 6 in the afternoon to 6 in the morning, sometimes even 8 in the morning, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. It's a long hustle, but it keeps me real busy. I can take in $350 a week, sometimes even more when I do it off the meter. All the animals come out at night. Whores, skunk pussies, buggers, queens, fairies, dopers, junkies. Sick, venal. Someday a real rain will come and wash all this scum off the streets.
But moving forward in time, then, of course, this episode is, the raids in this episode are, as you say, appropriate to a kind of crackdown on, not red light districts, but porn theaters and vice districts in the 1980s. Like you mentioned, the combat zone, of course, Times Square. Most famously New York. This is when they famously seedy Times Square of the 1970s.
And in the 80s, it was kind of in that transitional phase where some of they were still there, but then the cheap, dodgy electronics stores started popping up here and there, and then obviously in the 90s and Giuliani and the sort of Disneyfication, which we've talked about before, of Times Square, that was all flushed away. But like at this time period, the crackdowns were just starting to start because, again, New York is coming out of a decade, the 1970s, where people were afraid to walk the streets. You know what I mean? There was a definite sort of, maybe it didn't get as activist as it did under Giuliani, but there was a sense that there had to be something done from the top down to crack down on at least these areas of Manhattan. Now, the outer boroughs mostly were left to fend for themselves, but, Times Square is a showcase. Historically, it's super important. And the idea of having that in the heart of the city was tough for New York to handle.
It's always hard to get kind of objective histories of something like this, because I have heard this story told different ways. I've heard certainly, and one of the fracture points is about gay and straight porn theaters, because along with all of the hetero adult theaters, places like Times Square had a thriving, gay nightlife and sort of a gay, adult theater. And these kinds of places were seedy and sad as they probably were. They were also kind of important places for people to meet one another and express that side of their sexuality.
Yeah.
And that actually is another reason why people might go to a porn theater, right?
Yes.
If they need to do it away from their home.
Yes.
In other words, if
Absolutely.
if it's a secret.
Yeah.
Right.
And of course, the 1980s offered major cities across America an opportunity to crack down on these kind of places with the AIDS crisis, the sort of
right.
the bathhouse controversies in San Francisco and New York, among others, were the point of view from the gay community in a lot of quarters was this is an important part of social life for gay men, bathhouses, theaters, bookstores, that kind of thing. And, again, like the idea that there is a health crisis going on that's killing, tens of thousands of gay men intersects with that in this sort of, if you've read it and the band played on, the sort of Harvey Milk versus Toklas Club sort of, two sides of the sort of gay community's opinions on this in the 80s.
Yeah, so those kinds of, whether they were cracking down on vice writ large or whether this was a kind of homophobic attack on gay culture with other adult theaters just kind of along for the ride is... I've heard that story told both ways. I don't actually know where the truth lies.
Yeah.
But definitely by the time you get to 1990s, Times Square is a Disney store.
Yeah.
And a lot of the Cincinnati Vice District is a highway overpass now.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
That's
there
the
you
other
go.
thing that
Yeah.
happens.
You linked to this Samuel Delaney book in the show notes for the session. It looked kind of interesting.
Yeah. So this is an example of the science fiction writer Samuel Delaney wrote a book, Times Square Red, Times Square Blue, that is very much that sort of nostalgic look at the gay sex district of New York. And how important it was to him and his coming out and his sexual formation.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I think it's a sort of cri de coeur against the, Giuliani era, policing, broken windows policing, and Disneyfication of Times Square. This fits very well with the kinds of stories that we're always telling about, neoliberalism smashing the remnants of an older America.
Yeah.
I have to admit, again, my squickiness with porn means that I feel less... I'm not as broken up about the porn theaters getting
the mom and
busted
pop porn theaters getting
as I am about the mom and pop funeral homes. But,
Morning, Mrs. Applesway. Mr. Applesway.
Mr. Tink.
Suppose you know why I'm here.
Mr. Tink, I've told you this shop is not for sale.
Look, take the money. The city's rezoning this entire block. You're going to lose the shop.
No, we won't.
We have a petition.
Every customer for the past month has signed that, and proudly.
L. Smith, Bill Smith, Mr. Jones. Fake names.
Well, the last names might be, but the first names are real.
Oh, I love it.
Done. I'm going to Ronnie's.
Oh, wait. Take this clean-shaven tape over to Ronnie's dad for me. Would you care to explain this?
What's that?
One of those X-rated CD-ROMs. I will not have this filth in my house. This stuff sickens me, sex with a computer.
Mom, it's only porno.
Jimmy, honey, computers are not natural. There's no warmth. Not like a magazine. You can run your fingers over the pages.
You run your fingers over the pages. You watch your mouth!
Yeah, so some little bits that we like. There's actually a couple of guest stars in this episode that acquit themselves okay, I guess. We have the nurse is actually going to appear also in the next episode as well. We could talk a little bit about her there, but you had a memory of her appearing on a different show. Her name's Bonnie Urseth.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have ever put this together without the power of Google. Yeah. But she's kind of cute. She's kind of funny. She's funny in the continuity. She comes back in the first scene of our next episode, and I think she's funny in that scene. So I looked up what she was on, and I do have very dim memories of another show she was on called We Got It Made, which, classic cheeseball sitcom premise. I believe it's about
two guys who share an apartment,
bachelors
right?
who, for some reason, have this hot young maid, and
maybe it's like that Seinfeld
episode.
They had to, she hit their car and she had to be sentenced to their maid for like a few weeks, and then
yeah, exactly.
That is not something I remember. Wow, it was on for 5 seasons? Oh no, it was on for 1 season on NBC and 1 season syndication. Okay.
1 season 5 years later in syndication. So like somebody brought it back that the fans were carrying their torches for
We Got It Made. Yeah. There's one particularly vocal guy in the porn theater who's telling everybody to shush and stop shoving him and stop getting by him. And you actually managed to peg him as another committee guy.
He is another alumni of the committee. His name is John Brent. Now, we always say when someone's doing a great job as a guest star, they're a committee alum. I think that Brent, he ranks maybe above Johnny's ex-wife, but certainly well below Buffy or Del Murdoch in the pantheon of committee alums. He's fine.
Yes.
He's both in the theater, and then he also gets busted with them. So he's there in the denouement scene in the, when they're all in the jail cell. Basically, he's doing the classic bystander, listens in, and eventually joins in the conversation bit.
The Buzz Sapien phenomenon, which we've talked about before.
The Buzz Sapien, he says, he urges Herb to get the heart test.
I guess that line wouldn't have been so funny in the jail cell if he hadn't been so put upon earlier, but that first bit, they don't give him a lot of meat to work with. It's kind of,
Well, he's got to work around, again, I keep coming back to my own discomfort with the phenomenon, but he's got to work around the fact that he's sort of presenting as if he's affronted that they're spoiling his movie-going experience.
I mean, maybe he's a film reviewer, maybe he actually works for Larry Flint's Hustler and he's there taking notes under his trench coat,
Yes.
That's probably the secret origin that John Brent gave this guy. It was sort of
he sort of, because he kind of plays it like, he's like, do you mind?
His monocle pops out. Yeah. There's some great comedy, again, like I said, in the first scene, where Les is trying to let everybody know on who's listening to him that he won the Copper Cob, but
the Copper Cob is given by the Conservative Agrarian Broadcasters.
Yes.
So it's for Conservative Agrarian Broadcasters, which occurs to me. Does that mean that COB is some kind of acronym? Is it the Copper Cab?
Yeah, you're right.
That's too ridiculous.
No, maybe
right?
they spell agrarian with an O in Nebraska. It could be one of those weird. Maybe it's that Theodore Roosevelt
agrarian, Conservative Agrarian Broadcasters, the Copper Cob Award.
But it's great because now he's got the Buckeye Newshawk Awards are gold. Obviously, he's got the Silver Sow. Copper Cob, he's got all the different, sort of levels of metal, basically going through here. But yeah, so there's some great, we actually haven't seen Les mix up carts very much. The carts aren't usually, and for those of you not familiar with radio terminology, the cart is a cartridge that you plug into the deck and it will play.
Those of you not familiar with 30-year-old radio terminology, I'm guessing they don't use carts.
No, they probably don't. They probably use MP3s or some useless crap like that. But let's talk about the carts. This is why I wanted to talk about
carts.
So basically, they were invented for ease of use on the radio. Again, I'm sure that with recorded ads in the 50s, they probably had to be on vinyl platters or something like that before there was the invention of this cartridge.
Yeah.
So there's a 3-minute or like a 30-second or 1 minute long commercial on a little tiny disc that you got to put on the turntable. So these carts were invented in the 60s. And they're the root of all of the 8-track technology that would come later. Basically.
That's what they always look like to me, is 8 tracks. You sort of chunk them in, and they have the satisfying ka-chunk in the play. And
so apparently these were 4-track cassettes, and they were called the Stereo Pack, and they were invented by this guy who I can't believe has never come up on the podcast before because he is very. You will dig him the most, okay? Because this guy. Is Earl Madman Muntz.
There were billboards along the highways, Madman Muntz, all over.
He became really a celebrity.
Hollywood tours and things that people would go on they used to drive by the Muntz car lots and point them out. Yeah, Madman Muntz, if you're lucky, he'll come out and wave to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're considering television, buying or trading, think a moment. What set in all America costs so little, works so well? Thank you.
Now, people often said that the Muntz television was probably the finest made television set there was.
Yeah, we plugged this AC set in there, and it blew everything up, and the smoke was coming out of the room.
He's the man who invented the word, well, it isn't a word, TV.
So,
like
okay, first of all, the reference to him in Barton Fink, the John Goodman character, is Madman Munt. So it's sort of like Coen brothers obviously are going to have this deep knowledge. This guy was the classic, he's sort of the prototype for all of the crazy salesmen on TV, like Crazy Eddie and Cal Worthington in L.A. He basically sold cars, TVs, any big consumer item in the 50s. Basically, he would sell on the TV and the radio. And he was a tinkerer and an inventor. And one of the things, first one of the things he did is that he would put, he states that he is the first guy to have put fins on cars. Now, I don't necessarily believe this. I think a lot of his Wikipedia entry is old school self-promotion that he did back in the 50s and 60s.
I've just called it up, and I see that he's also credited with coining the abbreviation TV for television. Oh my God.
I don't know if that's necessarily true, but that's, this is the kind of stuff he would do to build up hype for his businesses. And he did sell consumer TVs in the 40s and 50s, and he invented this 4-track tape cartridge that became standard for all of the people who did radio. And then later on, it was developed further into the 8-track that we know and love, or knew and loved. But the idea behind the 4-track wasn't just for ease of use on the radio. Before there were cassette tapes, how did you play your tunes in your car? Well, there were those few car prototypes that had like a space for a turntable in them, but those obviously didn't work so well.
Not going to work too well on a bumpy road.
Exactly.
No.
So he was one of these guys, again, kind of referencing autofocus earlier with the people selling high-tech, hi-fi equipment to Hollywood stars. He installed these auto stereo pack cartridge players in the cars of the Rat Pack, Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra. Again, this Wikipedia entry seems like it's every single thing he ever bragged about himself put on there by his grandkids or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. If he hadn't died in 1987, we might have thought that he could have written it. But I love this guy. This is the picture is hilarious too.
Yeah.
Phyllis Diller was among his many girlfriends.
Oh,
that's the one he chose to brag about, was Phyllis Diller. He was buddies with Bert Lahr, Dick Clark, and Gene Autry.
Oh, yeah. He sold a Lincoln to Chiang Kai-shek, which is pretty awesome. You want to make sure that you're fighting communism on the front
all
lines.
These different things. Says that he got into home video in the 70s. Yep. Cellular phones in the 80s. But this guy was on it.
But you got to admit, like, even if none of the stuff he's bragging about here is true, if he did invent the crazy guy salesman character on TV ads in the 50s and 60s, like, right there, that makes him an immortal as far as I'm concerned, because there's nothing like a guy who is pretending to be insane. His prices are so low. I'm the whiz. Nobody beats me. That kind of thing.
Yeah, no, we're crazy about prices. Yeah, exactly. No, that's he's like, an unknown army's archetype or something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
See, all this fuss. Now, wasn't it nice of Mr. Carlson to go way out of his way this morning?
No, that's all right. I mean, tonight was my night to visit. I'm just getting out of the way early.
Now I expect to see a clean plate.
Gee, Herb, you look great. They haven't found anything wrong with your heart, have they?
Nope.
Oh, no, that's super. That means you're going to be out of here and on your vacation in no time, huh?
Huh? See? You want me out of town.
Huh?
Explain this.
Account executive, top 10 AM station, faltering client list. Kind of sounds like us, doesn't it? Call the general manager, 555-956. That is us. Oh, my God. This is the mistake.
Every out-of-work salesman has seen this.
Yeah, but see, that's not supposed to read that way.
Yeah, you just mentioned ticker, and everyone thinks you're a goner.
Oh, Herb, that's not true. Look, I promise you, your job will be there as long as you want it.
Well, our next episode this week is, as I said, part of a sort of a two-parter almost. Yeah. It's called Who's On First, and it does follow directly from Straight from the Heart. The episode begins with Herb still in the hospital, talking to the cute nurse, and horrified when he sees an ad in the paper that WKRP is apparently hiring a replacement salesman. All right, folks, I'm not going to lie to you. I watched this episode a week and a half ago, and I can't actually remember all the ins and outs, but as the name Who's On First suggests, this is an old school cockamamie, zany, mistaken identities kind of an episode where people are pretending to be other people. Les is pretending to be Mr. Carlson. Johnny is trying to get everyone to pretend to be him. And the big guy is pretending to be Herb. And it's wacky and it's zany. And I got to say, it worked for me in a sort of Fish Story-esque way. It is a cartoon, but I was laughing the whole time.
Yeah, this is one of the funnier, like, laugh out loud episodes I think we've even had, like, throughout all 4 seasons. We have obviously a whole part of season 4 to go, but, like, you're right. I laughed almost entirely the entire way through this. So you're right. So Herb obviously isn't making it back to the station anytime soon. His job is safe, but Andy has put the ad in the paper basically saying we need a junior salesperson.
Excuse me, are you ready for the next gentleman?
Yes.
Fine. I'll just wait in here until you decide. Cheap cologne makes me nauseous.
Mr. Carlson, we need someone.
Hogwash.
Now, this morning, for an example, a concert promoter is flying in from Philadelphia to talk with Herb. Now, someone has to fill in for him and close this deal. There is only so much that I can do around here.
That ad of yours made it sound like we were looking for a permanent replacement.
We're not going to find anybody good on a temporary basis. What is wrong with hiring, as we talked about, a junior salesman?
I had to go to the hospital this morning. Herb called me. He saw that ad.
Oh, dear.
Well, did you explain the thinking behind this?
I didn't remember it.
Now, the junior salespeople who come out for this hiring call, your comment in the notes was fantastic. They do all look like Gil from The Simpsons, basically. You know?
Basically, a lot of Willie Lomans and a lot of Gil Gundersons. It just, I gotta get this job. Just need one more lick at the brass ring. Come on, Gil. The sad sacks and weirdos sitting out there in the half renovated lobby, which just makes it even sadder.
It does, definitely. I mean, WKRP is on the way up, but they look better against the sort of bare, stripped walls, basically. But yeah, like, eventually the big guy is like, okay, listen, we're not gonna hire anybody permanently. But we've got to meet with this concert promoter from Philly, Pat Petrillo from Philly, and we've got to make sure we land this promotion. So I am going to go to this meeting with Jennifer as my assistant, but I'm going to go as Herb because they've only ever talked on the phone, basically. So
I don't think he intends to go as Herb. I think that he's just mistaken for Herb right off the bat.
Okay.
And they can't quite, and it just snowballs on from there as it does, because then it turns out that the guy that, of course, he and Herb had some kind of kickback scheme going on, and he needs to be persuaded that Mr. Carlson really is dumb enough to fall for this scheme.
Here is our big guy. Mr. Carlson, this is Pat Perillo.
Well, you've got quite a reputation, Mr. Carlson. I'm pleased to meet you.
Mr. Perillo?
Call me Pat, huh? Well, I see you've been bitten by the fishing bug, huh?
Where?
That means that you like to fish.
But I don't.
Well, Mr. Carlson, then we'll just get rid of all these stuffed fish. Why don't we all sit down?
Oh, yes. I fish.
Let's sit.
I'll sit here because it's my chair.
Everybody at the station does different levels of having to think on their feet and pretend to be somebody else. But I was actually really reassured to see the big guy. I mean, he does falter a couple times for humor's sake, but the big guy actually is able to roll with this, and you can see kind of glimmers of what he was like as the sales guy back in the 50s and early 60s, because he's like, well, I don't want to take and he's moral, right? I don't want to take a kickback. And Jennifer says, well, if you take the kickback, but it goes to the station and not to you, then it's okay. And of course, at that point, I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, but he kind of manages and owns the station, kind of. So like, it's basically all going to the same place anyway. But like, that was probably one of the less laugh out loud scenes of the episode, because I don't think that the guest star does necessarily a great job.
The guest star's not great, and it's where they're down in a parking garage or something like that.
Yeah, it's like something out of like All the President's Men or something. You know?
It seems like we're going in another direction.
Yeah.
That's right. But then it is the nature of these kind of episodes that it snowballs,
right?
And so it builds. And so that scene isn't that funny, but then it gets funnier as everyone, because then the other thing that is going on. Wait, now why is it Johnny is in debt to a bookie / loan shark, right?
Yeah,
named the Guido Scalisi. My apologies, Mike.
We'll talk about that in a little bit, but yeah, so like he knows somebody is coming to collect, and when someone actually does come to collect, Rob, it's the holy grail we've been looking for 4 seasons watching this show.
They finally got a big scary guy to play a big scary guy.
May I help you?
A guy named Fever. I want him.
Oh, I'm sorry he's not here.
He ain't at home either.
Really?
I'll wait. He'll show.
Mister,
Yeah?
he probably won't be back today.
So I'll wait till tomorrow.
Fine.
I don't like to wait.
No.
I hate it when people are running around afraid of Reverend Little Ed or Hoyt Axton.
Yeah.
They finally got an actual big guy, and he is a big damn guy. Yeah. Do we want to talk about guest stars now?
Let's talk about him since we're talking about it, because like he makes a real, the audience does their usual early 80s live studio audience when he comes into the station and talks to Bailey. But like this guy, when you're a big guy in Hollywood, you tend to get typecast doing certain kinds of roles. You're the heavy, you're the bartender, you're the alien creature who has to fight Captain Kirk.
Exactly, you are. Because, so this guy, his character name is simply Dave, but he's played by Mickey Morton, which almost sounds more like a gangster name than Dave, frankly. It sounds like an old school gangster name. Like, we're going to talk about Guido Scalisi in a second, but it sounds like a previous generation of gangster.
I do like that he's called Dave. That's a good touch, I think. They could have given him like a Moose or a Rocco, but they went with Dave, and I appreciate it.
They just kept it simple, and he's, he's got that sort of big lumbering affect of, he's like James Bond's Jaws.
Absolutely,
But so, of course, we look up what people have done, and yes, Dave's or Mickey Morton's other roles include, this is a fine list, and I've only picked out a few. He played Klug on Star Trek.
He had to fight, Kirk had to fight him in the Triskelions episode.
The Triskelions episode. That's
500
right.
Quatlus on the big guy. Or whatever.
Exactly. He played the great Solomon Grundy on Legends of the Superheroes, the supervillain Solomon Grundy.
Yeah, was that a live action show? I've never seen this before.
Apparently, this is news. Yeah. He played a monster called Gargantua on Wonder Woman, the Linda Carter Wonder Woman from the 70s. And perhaps best of all, he appeared in the Star Wars Holiday Special. He played the role of Mala. Fans, anyone know who Mala was? Mala was Chewbacca's wife.
Yes.
He played the role of Chewbacca's wife, Mala, in the Star Wars Holiday Special. And the Star Wars wiki tells me that apparently she is, in fact, official canon.
Oh, yeah, no, the Holiday Special is canon. They use bits and pieces of it elsewhere. But, Chewbacca and Mala share a really, really weird kiss in that episode, or it's like some kind of Wookiee, greeting to your spouse. And I just thought to myself, my God, you've got, what's the name of the guy who plays who's in the Chewbacca suit? I can't remember his name.
Yeah. Peter Mayhew.
Peter Mayhew, thank you. I was going to say David Prowse, but that was the guy who did Darth Vader, physically. Mm-hmm. But just the two of them, and they're both 7 feet tall, and they're just sort of their masks are trying to kiss each other, and it's just this weird, bizarre kind of fever dream.
And now 30 years later, you find out that it was queer content too.
So
just adds an extra little frisson to
it. It does, absolutely.
That's the special effects of those days. That if you wanted to have a 7-foot tall character, you needed a 7-foot tall guy.
It's true. Yeah, you had no digital way to make somebody 1.5 feet taller. You had to.
I think that the Mickey Mortons of the world probably don't get as much work anymore.
Yeah.
Like now, you just CGI Tobey Maguire to make him that tall or something.
Oh God, yeah. So he does a good job too. He's suitably intimidating. He's not goofy like the Reverend Little Ed, or indeed kind of country goofy like Hoyt Axton, I guess.
Yeah. Standing fast. I got a lot of friends.
Fever?
Where? I've been looking for that deadbeat all over myself. Have you seen him around?
Oh no, I haven't seen anyone for years.
Maybe we should just go look for him somewhere else.
Yes, yeah.
You're closer than the beefcake over there.
Now, wait just a minute. I hate to interrupt here.
Then don't.
Okay. Did I introduce myself? I'm Andy Travis. I'm program director here at WKRP. And this is my brother Randy, and this is old Venus, of course.
Of course. That's right, Bailey.
I think I'm just going to lie down for a while.
Johnny has his own, mistaken identity trying to throw people off the scent thing. As he pops into the lobby with Andy and Venus, Johnny becomes Andy, and Andy becomes his brother Randy.
His brother Randy.
And of course, old Venus, of course.
Old Venus, of course. And then, of course, this kind of farce requires that there be one person left out of everything to just get more and more confused.
Yes.
And that part is ably played by Bailey in this episode.
God.
She is sitting at the desk, and she is wonderful.
She's so great. When the big guy and who's being Herb and the promoter and Jennifer first come back to the station, Bailey kind of it's funnier if they kind of keep up, but don't completely keep up. And that's what happens when Les gets introduced to the situation, because without the big guy, there has to be a big guy. And Les is obviously the only one at the station who's going to be a believable big guy, He's got the bow tie, he's dressed kind of conservatively. But man, how good was Richard Sanders doing the sort of I remember I'm the big guy and this is where I work.
he's always 2 beats behind. He remembers that he's the big guy. But of course it works because what they're trying to do is convince Perillo that the big guy is clueless. So it ends up working just fine. The fact that he is completely, 2 sentences behind everything that everybody says.
Oh, it's fantastic. And I'm glad they don't go the extra mile, getting the comedic mileage out of the big guy feeling put out that Herb's dissed him constantly, because I feel like that could easily kind of get them into a comedic rut. And instead they kind of,
I guess, but the big guy is stone cold at the end of the episode.
Oh my God.
He doesn't he does come after Herb, but before he comes after Herb, the moment that I think is the most cold moment is when as he walks out the door, he turns to Andy and says, "Just doing my job, Johnny," and thus convincing
Dave,
Chewbacca's wife, that Andy is Johnny, and all Andy's done to deserve this is, Andy was a bit of a dick.
Yes.
Andy was doubting that Mr. Carlson could handle the sales job.
That's true,
right?
yes. And, the whole idea of them kind of being at odds over whether to hire somebody for her. But yeah, this is the second, maybe third episode where Andy gets beat up at the end,
but this time it's directly at Mr. Carlson's hands. And Arthur smiles as he sentences him to the beating from a loan shark's thug.
It's just
from a hired goon.
Exactly. It is amazing to kind of, this is the second episode that's it's not the end of the episode, but it's the end before the final break and the final stinger. But this is the second episode in WKRP history that's ended with a punchline delivered by Gordon Jump exactly perfectly. This is of a piece with Turkeys Away. This is very much the same, like, Gordon Jump gets the last word. He's the comedic dean of the cast, and he gets that and he delivers it so perfectly and so beautifully.
So it's just cold and it's wonderful. And then after that, I almost think that the stinger is gilding the lily, because then he goes to Herb's hospital room and, to me, unconvincingly, rolls up his sleeves as if he's about to beat Herb, as if he himself is about to beat on Herb. And I don't completely buy that. Not after the perfection of just doing my job, Johnny.
You do need that scene, though, because Johnny eating all of Herb's hospital food and pocketing the Jell-O for later is just so great. And, Johnny's just escaped a brush with death, so he's got a huge, appetite, so he's got to steal all. He's like, this counts as my visit. It's kind of like the Seinfeld episode with the soup being the meal. He's like, no, I'm here, even though you guys came to visit Herb as well. This counts as my visit, my turn in the rota.
$562.16? Look, I had a little run of bad luck with this guy Scalise. Now I can't go home. Guido Scalise? If I don't pay up, there's a guy waiting in my house going to turn me into a doorstop.
Yeah, let's talk about Guido Scalise a little bit. Why not? Let's go deep into that. This is not the first time that Italian Americans have been impugned on this television show program. Rob.
Italian Americans,
yeah.
No, that's it.
This is of a piece with the episode with jury duty, which I realized tonight as we were recording is kind of like a dry run for this episode. A Mile in My Shoes is kind of like the unsatisfying prequel to Who's on First, because in that episode, everybody's trying to fill in for each other as well, but it's just not funny.
Yeah, we might have even said while we were doing it, this is a classic premise for a sitcom, the episode where everybody tries to do everybody's part, but it's terrible.
Yeah.
And here, with what makes the difference other than leaving out the blackface?
Right.
That sort of, you see the difference in that execution makes.
Yeah, execution and throwing people into the situations unannounced and unprepared, that kind of makes it funny. But yeah, in 1979, 1981, Italian Americans could be a little bit of a punchline. When it comes to their affiliation with a certain secret organization that I'm not going to speak about openly on the podcast because, omerta. But it also makes me think about the Daydreams episode and Andy's daydream of being the Godfather. It's sort of these kind of images loomed large in the public imagination. I found it interesting that the concert promoter from Philly was also Italian American, which is
also Italian. So there's a whole world of shady.
He's shady
Italians
too,
around.
exactly. Yeah. So there's the classic Sopranos episode where the Columbus Day one, I think it is, where the gangsters take it upon themselves to bolster the public image of Italian Americans by attaching themselves to the Columbus Day issue, which was super hot in the late 90s.
Which I assume was that episode in some way a reaction to, Italian American groups responding to
exactly
The Sopranos?
What it was. David Chase kind of wanted to stick it to them, which is why it's one of the worst episodes of The Sopranos ever. Although watching, I think it's Syl and Paulie go into a Starbucks type establishment and say, we invented all this stuff, look at what they're doing, that kind of thing. That to me is always quality,
Well, I don't want to ask you to speak for all Italian Americans, but I got to assume that the vast majority of Italian Americans love The Sopranos.
Oh God, I mean, we've talked about going to the barber, and there's this one down here that I go to that they've got the black velvet paintings of the casts of Goodfellas, The Godfather, and Sopranos. It's like the Holy Trinity up on the wall.
Yeah.
And you can have a little cup of coffee with a little bit of Zambuca in it in the morning if you're so inclined as you're getting your hair cut. I mean, most of the guys in that place probably don't spend longer than 5 minutes actually getting their hair cut, and the rest of the time they're just bullshitting with the guys at the, with the guys who hang out there all the time. But talking of Italian Americans not liking the authenticity of depictions in the media and or food and drink, have you seen me retweeting any of the stuff from that Twitter account? Italian opinions on food.
What is it called? Italians angry about food?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, it's real Italians, not Italian Americans, but every time there's a bad Italian recipe adaptation in the US or the UK, all these people just flood to Facebook and just comment after comment. My mother just died because I told her about this thing, and now
to report their outrage that people are what? Like, what's an example?
Oh, like a carbonara with cream instead of eggs, like but like also like a pizza with penne on top of it and stuff like that. Just they just and they get really, really like they get kind of emotional and operatic about it. I don't know. It's sort of like a little emotional, a little hot-headed, let's say. It's a cultural thing,
It's a cultural thing. The shivs are going to come out any minute now. Yeah.
We're all the men. They're dead from vendettas over bad Italian food on the internet.
But clearly it is a phenomenon, enough that someone could fill a very funny Tumblr or Twitter account just of people registering their outrage.
I mean, listen, my opinion on all this stuff is like, is it minstrelsy? Is it like, horrible stereotyping? I mean, like, the problem is that, like, gangsters are cool. That's the problem.
Yeah,
it's like, if you grow up around this stuff and, like, you hear stories of, my dad would tell me stories. He wasn't exactly Henry Hill, torching cabs, in the streets of East Boston. But, like, it was a fact of life that the guy was going to come by and, like, sell the football cards, and, like, the kids were going to do, we're going to run numbers back and forth and stuff like that. That happened. It was just part of the sort of the fabric of the community, as it were. And it's like, when it's every day like that, and it's, it's still removed, it's at a distance, but when it's every day like that, it's, I mean, this generation, obviously it's not, but my dad's generation it was. And it was just sort of just part of what life was all about. It's like, there are certain things you can't get. There was no lottery back then. You could go to the track and bet horses. But if you wanted to bet football, if you wanted to bet the numbers, you had to do it through your local Guido Scalisi. You know what I mean? So,
right. Yeah. Well, as ethnic stereotypes go, the reason, like, that's one of the cooler ones, which is why, as much sympathy as I have for this complaint, like, it's better than some.
It does remind me of the Simpsons episode where the mafia goes against the Yakuza, and there's the little guy who's going to do something cool, and you're not sure what it is.
It's going to do something. It's going to be...
We talked about the Goodfellas minute, and, how much I love that movie, and I love Scorsese and all this stuff, but, like, do I ever feel weird watching and sort of appreciating these as somebody? I mean, I'm half Italian, so I don't know if that, like Henry Hill, it's sort of but like, do I feel awkward sometimes appreciating this stuff and seeing how it glorifies that sort of lifestyle? I mean, maybe a little bit. Like, the problem is that The Godfather was such a huge, as we mentioned just a little earlier, such a huge cultural touchstone and such a classic film. When Robert Evans talked about working with Francis Ford Coppola on this, and the kid stays in the picture, his overwrought sort of, bio pick. He talks a little bit about, like, maybe not so much Coppola being aware of the stereotypes, but like wanting to kind of make it as authentic as he could. Because again, like, here's somebody who grew up around this stuff, who, just like Scorsese, they saw these people on the streets and everything. I mean, I think about Don DeLillo, who's another guy who grew up in, an urban Italian-American milieu, who has returned to it again and again, but like has used that sort of childhood around people who were a little bit dodgy to kind of give him an insight into the human character. I mean, if there's one thing that sort of like the gangster film or the gangster TV show does, it's kind of like, it's a wish fulfillment. When you're living in a society like this where everybody's got to follow the rules and play by the rules, it's just like what Henry Hill says at the end of Goodfellas. Now I got to live my life like a schnook, like I'm not cool anymore. I don't have a lot of money. I don't have a lot of drugs. I just have to live in this tract house somewhere. It's like, this is a wish fulfillment kind of thing. And I think for Italian Americans, there's a certain sense that those of us who had families who played by the rules and didn't do any of this crazy stuff, it's sort of like a little bit of escapism, I guess, Now, they're horrible people, obviously. They're murderers. They're, they're violent. They steal from people. But, there's always been that sort of Robin Hood sort of impulse. People have always loved stories like that. So that's my half-hearted defense of the gangster sort of genre, I guess.
Yeah, one thing I think of when the examples you give, Scorsese movies, The Godfather, they are, they're very well done, and there's a commitment to rendering details really well. And most of these, like, and Don DeLillo, many of these are made by Italian Americans. I guess The Sopranos, not so much, but also The Sopranos is marked by...
Well, David Chase is Italian American.
Oh, David. Oh,
yeah.
He
did a stage name. He did like a pen name, basically.
Okay, but certainly, he's got an exquisite sort of eye for detail.
Yes.
That's what's so marvelous about that show. I would distinguish that from Hugh Wilson just calling a bookie Guido. Like, to me, the sort of like to just sort of like say, oh, he's some sort of scummy guy. Call him Guido or something. You know,
in
like
his
that,
southern
like,
accent. Yeah, I can kind of picture it now. Yeah,
like that's and so I feel like he reminded me of Guido the Killer Pimp, who is I'm blanking on the movie, the Tom Cruise movie.
Risky Business. Yeah, with Joey Pants.
Right, he's being pursued by Joey Pants is Guido the Killer Pimp, and like there, I feel that the authenticity level is a little bit lower.
Well, I think it is when wasps try to do like gangs do, they don't. You're right, they don't quite get it right, and that goes back to that Robert Evans thing I was talking about. He's like, I want to be able to taste the spaghetti sauce, that sort of thing, make it authentic. But like, there's also the fact that this is like a half-hour sitcom, so broader probably works a little better.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, nobody is allowed to use the G word other than real Italian Americans like me. So, sorry, Rob, you're gonna get docked some points for saying Guido in a.
I'm speaking of the character. I'm talking about the character Guido. You got this guy named Guido over here. You got this guy named Guido over here. You got a whole bunch of Guidos, is what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, it's like we got Peter and Paulie.
The guy in the middle saying, "What do you want from me?"
Exactly.
The second episode of MTV's controversial new reality show, Jersey Shore, airs tonight. If it's anything like the first, it will make some viewers very upset. CBS News correspondent Bianca Solorzano has the story.
It has tons of hair gel, tanning, and hooking up. MTV's newly launched reality show, Jersey Shore, follows 8 hormone-crazed young adults through a wild summer. These 20-somethings are all Italian Americans. And some Italian American heritage groups are angry over what they feel are offensive ethnic stereotypes portrayed in the show, including the unchecked use of the term Guido.
I love Guidos! Let's go!
I don't think it's fair for anybody to be portrayed like this. I know it sells, but it's unfortunate that MTV has become really empty TV. What I would like to see is for them to pull the show.
During my time coming up, and I used to go to the Jersey Shore every summer, if we called ourselves Guidos, or if somebody called me a Guido, worse yet, do you know what they were calling me? Stupid.
No, I'm hearing that now. I never knew that. It definitely has changed.
So what does a Guido mean today?
It's more of like a lifestyle now.
It's a lifestyle.
It's a style. It's like a swag.
So some little bits that we liked. I noticed that you found, I couldn't see this on, I didn't notice it, but like the big guy is reading an outdoors magazine.
Yeah, I've taken to freezing the frame if there looks like something that might be interesting to look at. And the big guy in his office is reading Western Outdoor News, but the headline is turkey season set to open. And nothing happens by accident in set design. Like they might be they were never above reminding people of their most famous episode.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Yeah. And it would have been open because they would have been taping this in like August or September for airing in November. So it works really well.
I guess we are in the fall. That's right.
Couple of cool posters to kind of hit 1981 again, us over the head with 1981. The Foreigner 4 album, the Film Leader 4 logo is up on the booth, and you can just see the edge of a poster of Hall & Oates' very, very huge album Private Eyes from 1981 outside the booth as Johnny is talking to Bailey right after that scene.
Ooh, you have sharp eyes to get that one. Okay.
Well, you can see the edge of John Oates' face. I mean, it's indelible.
It's
I mean, yeah. Another great 1981 reference. We've gotten hints of Venus's being really good with money in the past.
Yes.
And Johnny, obviously, he's got to try to go to Venus. He literally hits up everyone in the station for this $500.
He hits up everybody for money to try and save him from a beating. Yes. And nobody will, they're not going to enable Johnny and his gambling problem. They're not even going to save him from a beating.
It's $1,500 in 2017 money. I don't know about you, but I don't have $1,500 easily available at work to kind of,
to just hand a coworker. Yeah, fair enough. Yes, Johnny tries to butter him up, and he says, "When Venus Flytrap speaks, everybody listens." And that's an early 80s reference, because that's the slogan of E.F. Hutton, right? When E.F. Hutton talks, is it an investment firm?
Yeah, because what would happen is there'd be a bunch of, this is that sort of beginning of the early 80s aspirational stuff happening in ads. You'd have a bunch of people in a beautiful sort of like restaurant with big plushly laid out like leather chairs, and like they'd be talking at their table about their stock tips, and then all of a sudden everybody in the restaurant would shush and just put their ear out like that and go, "Oh, yes, we're going to get some advice from the person who uses E.F. Hutton." And that would make everyone want to know exactly what E.F. Hutton was recommending as far as stocks go. Now, I don't remember what happened to them, whether they were like a Wolf of Wall Street kind of like, dodgy firm in the 80s that ended up crashing in 87 or not. But like, you don't remember hearing about them very much after the 80s. That's kind of why I figured maybe that's what happened to them.
Yeah, and if they're selling, they're selling the aspirational idea of, oh, this is your guy on the inside, but they're selling it on TV. Obviously, they're going after the middle American, Joseph P. Kennedy. The legend is that he got out of the market in 1929 when he heard his shoeshine boy offering stock tips.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
and he said, "Oh well, when people of that sort are in the market, it's time for me to sell." And that's how he escaped the crash. They say.
Rob, would you like to hear what happened to E.F. Hutton? It ties in perfectly with this episode, and it's making me
bring it.
This is the kind of stuff that makes me wonder if there's a greater conspiracy among every. Okay, so in the 1980s, Hutton was caught up in a number of difficulties that ultimately led to the firm to seek a buyer. Their most serious trouble came from a check kiting scandal in 1985. In early 87, right before the crash, an internal Hutton probe revealed that brokers at an office in Providence, Rhode Island, laundered money for the Patriarcha crime family.
Oh my goodness. Their fingers in every pot.
Now, for those of you who aren't up on your mafia lore, Boston never had an official La Cosa Nostra family. We only had the Patriarchas down in Providence. There's a reference to it in The Departed where, Frank Costello is talking about sometimes they send up these Italians from Providence and I gotta take care of them because Boston was basically run by Whitey Bulger in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. So, but yeah, this is, I had a feeling something bad might have happened to E.F. Hutton in 1987, and look at that. It's right there in black and white on Wikipedia.
Was it two just low-rent visual gags that amused me in this pair of episodes is that we'd see two presents being given in this episode.
Oh, right.
First, they give Les a present to celebrate his Copper Cob Award. And that's kind of a funny scene where they all... where the big guy gives a kind of speech that you would think Les would love to hear, but Les is on hold, so he's ignoring him. He's on hold on the telephone.
Right.
But the present they give him is, he does like the way it's wrapped, because it's snakeskin and pigs. And someone has Andy cut out these pink paper pigs? Like who did the work? It appears to have been Andy.
I don't know. If he did, that's just adorable that Andy would care that much.
It is kind of adorable, because then, that's right, in this episode, Mr. Carlson shows up at Herb's hospital room with a present for him. Of course, he's also planning on beating him.
Jennifer's got the gift, though. She's like...
Jennifer's holding the gift, that's right. And it's wrapped in gold paper with an actual white belt as a ribbon.
These had to be just the prop department just having fun, basically, with like trying to come up with the best sort of gift packaging for each of these characters. It's great.
Yeah, the implication is that someone at WKRP really, had a lot of métier. They took their time with wrapping presents.
Did we ever find out what's in that package for Herb? I'm trying to remember.
We don't. Les's present is a build-it-yourself trophy case.
Yes.
But Herb's present doesn't get opened.
What's in the box?
What's in the box? It's like Pulp Fiction.
I was gonna say, or it's like Seven. We never see Lucille again. So, oh no, that's horrible. I'm not ending on that. Forget it.
Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with more WKRP riffs and memories. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it.
We're online at holdmyorderterribledresser.com, which, believe it or not, wasn't taken. We're also available on iTunes, and we always appreciate your iTunes subscriptions,
reviews, ratings, and downloads. So get on there and give us some stars.
Good day, and may the good news be yours.
If you've ever wondered whatever became of me, I'm living on the air in Cincinnati, WKRP. I'm at WKRP in Cincinnati.